Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our dance history module. This is lecture two of the series. A quick reminder that these lectures are a little longer because of the amount of information that we need to cover. Um, I've included some spaces that I would suggest taking a break, but because this is a recorded lecture, feel free to take your break at any time. Feel free to stop and come back to it. There is a lot of information to cover, and I want to make sure you get this. Also, make sure you're using your lecture guide. Jazz is vernacular bodied rhythm driven movement that articulates instead of creating a specific shape. This quote from Billy Siegenthaler, I believe, encompasses the idea that culture is dynamic. It's ever changing, it's ever growing, and because of that, the dance forms are going to continue to change and continue to grow. If we looked at a ballet performance in 2021, it would be very much different from that of something in 2020 and different than something from the 80s versus something from the 1900s versus and further back. And that is because the societies, the groups of people that are looking at the dance and are doing the dance, their bodies are changing, their values are changing, and because of that, their dance form is changing too. We see this in jazz. The American society is still growing, changing, and developing. And as it grows, develops, and changes, so will our dance form, jazz dance. Dance is this physical manifestation of a culture and a society. The dance forms, the music, the art are informed, inspired by, nods to what's going on in society. So, as this earlier part of the thing that's now been given the official term of jazz, we have the Harlem Renaissance, but we also have this Great Depression that is happening during this time. There are several reasons given for the cause of the Great Depression, some of which are the stock market crash and World War I. It directly overlaps the Harlem Renaissance, and during this time, a lot of people are out of work. As a matter of fact, 25% of Americans are out of work, and 60% of that population, 60%, of African American men are out of work. As an artist, oftentimes it's not uncommon for an artist to have multiple streams of income. I'm going to put it that way. And this need is intensified. This need to find work elsewhere is intensified during this Great Depression because during this time in American history, Black musicians were not allowed to have their music played on the radio, and they were not allowed to record in studio. So live performances are where people are earning money. This is a stream of income. And because of this live performance aspect, the club scene provides an escape, not only because of the Great Depression and the woes, the financial woes of life, but, well, yeah, it provides an escape because of the financial woes and everything that's going on. It provides a financial escape, a mental escape, but it also provides some money because people start to earn money or use the club as a way of earning money. Also during this time, we are seeing a Latin American influence. So the danzón, given credited by being created by Miguel Perez, happened earlier in the century, and it's now moving into the U.S. It's here in the U.S. We are also seeing Cuban artists coming in through both Cuba, entering the U.S. both through Cuba and New York during this time. So a big jazz moment in history, music, would be in 1947. Chano Pozo comes and he meets with Dizzy Gillespie, and that meeting gives a whole new spark to the musical language and the dance form itself, because these dance forms are coming with the people and they're influencing the dance movement. as mentioned, the Savoy, the clubs are the escape. So the Savoy is a ballroom that is opens in 1927 in New York, and this it's a mixed population. So you'll see people like Jack Cole, which is mentioned later as one of the uh, fathers of classical jazz dance. You see Asada Dafour, who is a Sierra Leone dancer, given credit for giving this concert form style to West African techniques. Everyone mixed, like from all over the world, is in the Savoy, and they're having a good time, and they're having competitions to make money, because there's a lot of things going on outside of the club where people need money. So these competitions are a source of income. It's another stream of income. One of the competitions that happens during this time is the Lindy Hop competitions. So the Lindy Hop is a example of a dance form that we see blends of different aesthetics. So we see African aesthetics and we see European aesthetics. We see the improvised, virtuosic embellishments given credit for being some of the foundations of West African traditions, but we also see this couples dancing that is an aesthetic and a foundation of some of a European aesthetic. So the Lindy Hop blends this thing, because here in America we are a blend of several different societies, groups, cultures, traditions, however you want to frame it. Now, notice I've given you 1927 to 1950, so we're covering some time. The Savoy was open for a good deal of time. After the 1950s and after World War I and II at this point, the Lindy Hop begins to lose some of its improvisation via the breakaway, which is a movement when the two dancers pull away from one another, and then they perform an improvised series of movements or gestures and then come back together. Well, as the Lindy Hop becomes standard in American society, it becomes codified. So I can use the term codified because you know what it means now. It becomes codified. It's a sequence of movements, and it loses its improvisational space because of this codification. So it changes. Vernacular jazz, aka the folk dances of the time, aka the social dances of the time, aka means also known as these traditional jazz movements would be the Juba. We mentioned Master Juba and Henry Lane, and we mentioned what the Juba was, the Shim Sham, the Black Bottom, the Charleston. Tapping was a part of, at this moment, was still a part of it. Swing, Lindy Hop, Jitterbug, Foxtrot. So notice that ballroom dancing, some of these ballroom dances are a part of this initial era of early jazz dance, also known as traditional jazz dance or vernacular jazz dance. These terms kind of depend on the person that is speaking. These are terms of preference. So this moves us into the classic jazz space, and this is where we begin to see codification. Characteristics of jazz would be the strong use of the contraction in the hips and the chest, isolation of body parts, the parallel passes. So this is leaning back to our ballet vocabulary, shoulder twist, and hinges. So these different moves. And there will be a video that will show some of these movements as we go along. So you'll see some of them. This is informed by a desire to move away from tap. So jazz wants to be separated from tap. Now, we'll get to that in another slide. But it still includes elements of tap, and we're continuing to draw from other parts of the world. So Africa, the Middle East, European forms, India, and the Americas. So this jazz dance, even though it's in its classic form and it's beginning to be codified, the things that are included in the pot come from all around the world, because as we're looking at American culture, we're looking at a group of people that are from all around the world. Catherine Dunham comes back again as being the grandmaster of jazz. So when we look at Catherine Dunham's technique, if you remember, it was based on the use of isolations, right? So that isolations is a characteristic of this classic jazz era. It also, Dunham's technique helped to dignify vernacular dances and being dances of people of color. And people of color is a big umbrella. So that means that we're encompassing lots of places in the world. But looking at those vernacular dances and saying, how can we put them into a performance space? What needs to happen so that they can be valued and seen and shared, right? So Dunham's technique lays the foundation for a lot of these characteristics of that classic jazz, which is why she's considered the grandmaster of jazz. Her codified technique is based on isolations, and she is also a choreographer for several motion pictures. Her company is one of the first companies of color, of diverse populations to be allowed to perform in movies, and was very adamant about her dancers being seen. So if she had people of darker complexion, she would say, like, you don't have the option to not include this person in the video. We're going to include everyone, or there is no one. So she was adamant about the progression of diversity and inclusion as it relates to dance form. There's no clear reason why tap and jazz are separated now. So I asked around to different people that I know are researchers of jazz and tap, and here are some of the reasons that they gave to me. Excuse me, I'm stumbling over my words. One was that tap continued to stay in that realm of vernacular dance, so it would be something that you were taught to do from someone in your family or a neighbor, similar to pat and juba. I know that when I learned how to pat juba, I learned it from an Appalachian company that were, it was a group from the Appalachians. They were a dance company that was owned by friends of my parents, but it was in a relaxed setting that we learned this pat and juba and clogging and things like that. So tap kind of, for this person, they felt that tap stayed in that frame. Some believe that it died or went away because the focus shifted to rock and roll. So there are different hypotheses, but no clear reason. I'll continue to research this, but I do know that we begin to see it come back in the 80s and 90s, specifically because there's a documentary about tap, and with the movie there's a movie called White Nights that the stars are Savion Glover, excuse me, and I'm sorry, not Savion Glover, Gregory Hines and Barishnikov, the ballet dancer, are the stars of this movie. So this relationship in this movie, them dancing in this movie, inspires people to go back to tap dancing. Some honorable mentions of tap dancers: Henry Lane Juba, aka Master Juba, is credited with being the single most influential dancer of the 19th century. So remember that when we are speaking of the 19th century, we're actually talking about the 1800s. Master Juba, Henry Lane, was a winner of many competitions. So he traveled the world doing this dance. Reminder that Juba is a dance form named Guiba that comes from West Africa, and Juba was given to people that were good dancers and good musicians, which is probably why Henry Lane was named Master Juba. So he traveled throughout the U.S. and throughout Europe in these dance competitions earning money. He passed away at 27. There are images of him that seem to make him look older than 27, and that's in part because during his time, he still had to wear blackface, so this is makeup that you see applied to his face. The Nicholas brothers are also honorable mention. They are a set of brothers. They were known for their 10-foot high leaps and splits. This is documented in your book, so I'm kind of going through this because this is information that I'm pulling from your reading. They were the first African Americans to sign a contract with a Hollywood film company. Um, just some other information about Hollywood. There were different politics in New York versus Hollywood. And in part of that was because of the groups that were buying studios and things like that. Um, and the people that were buying there were different politics on the East Coast versus the West Coast. And some of those decisions were race oriented. The Nicholas brothers also appeared in more than 50 films. Oh, I went back. I don't know how I did that. So in the 1940s and the 1960s, we see this development, this switch, that dropping out of tap, and we see more influence of ballet in the form. We also see that this dance is in production, so we're moving into that Hollywood, that musical theater space. Some other honorable mentions are Fred Astaire, who was given credit for his tap and ballroom, right? So we talked about that ballroom as being a vernacular thing. People, when you socialize, you were doing some of these ballroom dances. His musicality and his humor. We also, I also would like to mention Gene Kelly for his lyrical use, his smoothness, and his stunts. This link is a link to a scene from Singing in the Rain where you get to see Gene Kelly be the wonderful person that he was. So now we're moving into these fathers of classical jazz dance. We mentioned Katherine Dunham as being the grandmaster, but these people that are given credit for being the fathers. Jack Cole, these people are listed in your book. Matt Maddox, Bob Fosse, and Jerome Rabinowitz, who changed his name to Robbins. So I mentioned this earlier in the semester as we talked about dance history and people moving to different places and adjusting their names. I brought it up with Balthazar Jouet as he changed his name. There's an Italian version and there's a French version. Jerome Robinson and Fred Astaire are also examples of people who changed their last names to fit in more with the communities that they were working in. Some basic jazz moves. And once again, take a break if necessary because we have some more information to go through. If not, I'm moving on. So Fosse style, pay attention to this because this is going to be important for your tact. So Fosse is listed in your reading, but if we're looking at characteristics of his style, the use of vernacular dance, the amoeba formation, which is kind of like if in your biology class, the amoeba is kind of this thing that just changes form. It's not a set form. It's not a square. It's not a circle. It's somewhere in between, but it's a glob, right? So Fosse uses this glob amoeba formation in his choreography, the isolation of everything, including your eyebrows and your ears, and isolating everything, moving these things separately of the rest of your body. The use of props, especially hats. Fosse began to lose his hair, and as a way to not take away from or bring attention to his hair receding, he was known for using caps, same thing. Similar things, in his choreographies and his dancers also. Fosse was also a big user of that pigeon-toed, turned in, bent knee, hunched over stance, right? We saw this stance in Rite of Spring, but also this use of limp wrists. So notice that some of these things are coming back again, or we see repeatedly. This takes us into commercial jazz. Think of Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, and Paula Abdul. So commercial jazz is, there's an emphasis on tricks and these turns, and this might be the jazz that some of you are more familiar with, where the person does a flip and they touch their head with their foot, and that's the commercial jazz. It's tricks and flips and turns. Not to say that it's absent of dance, but to say it includes these things too. There's also this idea of corporeal orature, which is a term that is created by Tommy DeFrance. Corporeal orature it's interpretive dance. It's in physical interpretation of the lyrics. This commercial jazz is a little different than the previous jazz forms because of those tricks and things. And it was informed and inspired by MTV. So MTV happens in 1980. MTV premieres, and it is given credit for the globalization of dance. So it creates access to dance in a different kind of way. Like now, all you need to do is turn on your television to see dance. Think about it like right now in the current pandemic, you can take classes all over the world because of Zoom and Blue Jeans and some of these other virtual platforms. So MTV did the same thing for society. You see music videos, you see dance, and what you also begin to see is this growth of self-trained dancers, like dancers that are learning choreographies based off of the video. So think about like TikTok, right? So MTV would be the equivalent of the premiere of MTV would be equivalent to the premiere of Zoom and TikTok, which was formerly Musical.ly, right? Nobody was really using it then, but now as TikTok, it's this thing where people go and learn these dances. Frank Hatchett, very, very important person. He taught Paula Abdul and Britney Spears. So these are some jazz dancers. And Frank Hatchett is given credit for revitalizing jazz dance, also creating a space for dancers that were not necessarily the typical Broadway dancer. Maybe maybe their body shape didn't fit in with the casting call, or maybe something else about them didn't fit in, or maybe they didn't have enough training to make the call. Hatchett's place at the Broadway Dance Center was a place where you could find that training, that additional training, that space to be you. Frank Hatchett is also given credit for, or not given credit for, he had a style that he called bopping to the music. So there's an emphasis on your personal interpretation of the music, and there's also like the singing of the phrasing. This happens, I do this when I teach my West African classes. I'm like, we're not counting. But I think the best example is, I'm going to go to like one of the reels on Instagram. There's the Cardi B challenge for Up, and the guy is like going through the dun dun nothing 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 ooh 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 baka baka bow. I'm sorry if you've never seen that. It's on Instagram, but check it out. I bring that up because it is an example of using sounds and articulations to help the dancer to remember the phrasing versus counting. Because once again, in jazz, you are recreating the music. You're having this dialogue, so it's not about the counts as it is where the movement fits into the rhythm. Frank Hatchett was at BDC for 30 plus years, and in 2013 received the Lifetime Achievement Award. I mentioned these people very quickly, but just to give their names again, I think that it is important to give people their flowers, to give people credit for what they've done. Paula Abdul studied under Frank Hatchett. She began as a Laker girl. For people that watched Coming to America, she was the choreographer for the first Coming to America. She was also a choreographer for both Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson, and a judge on So You Think You Can Dance. Chita Rivera, the first Latina to be honored by the Kennedy Center. She was one of the leading ladies in those movies during the 1950s. If you watch musicals and things like that, she is the dancer. She is that one that's doing those high kicks. She studied at the New York City Ballet, but was also one of Jack Cole's dancers. Jazz dance continues to grow. Some people consider jazz dance to its most recent iteration to be hip hop. So that's going to, I'm gonna just leave that there. You can agree or not agree. I understand that we would have different feelings about it, but that is a mindset of some people right now. I offer you this slide on contemporary jazz versus street jazz. So in contemporary jazz, you see more use of the rib cage initiating the movement. So it starts with the breath. The breath initiates the movement. This use of pedestrian movement, similar like to our contemporary modern dance, we see still these ballet elements, the passe, the battement, the pirouettes, and some choreographers that you might see this with, choreographers from So You Think You Could Dance, Mia Michaels and Sonia Tay. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful choreographers. Street jazz would be that kind of like what you see as background dancers now, in more of like, I'm going to say Beyonce videos, more of that kind of those kind of dancers where you do see some of the social dances, but you also see these technical elements in them. But they're less tricks, so they're not going to do the touching your head with your toe kind of thing. There's more of a seamless in both contemporary jazz and in the street jazz. There's more of a seamless inclusion of the ballet aesthetic. Your last tat for this module is the Fugue and Libertango. This is a 3-paragraph submission with more complete directions on your Canvas website. The first paragraph is a brief history of jazz. Remember that in all of your submissions and your World Dance Project, you are teaching the reader. So teaching someone that is not taking this class. So don't assume that the person knows something. Describe, explain, and be objective. The second paragraph is about the Fugue. So you're going to give information about Bob Fosse, and then you're going to write at least 5 sentences for that paragraph that are specifically base sentences. So you're teaching and you have base sentences. And look for places to connect the what you describe of his style. So if you mention a movement, think about how that connects to one of the things that you mentioned as his style. The third paragraph is Libertango. It's a base paragraph, but a similar thing. Think back to jazz and some of the characteristics of the style. So as you're describing, as you go through and you have your sentences, and think back to that first paragraph, what you wrote about jazz history and how some of those sentences might connect to what you wrote. So always connecting, always connecting, always connecting. And that brings us to the end of this lecture. I hope you have a wonderful day. Please remember to email me prior to the assignment due date so that your questions can be answered in a timely fashion, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.